Babette for recording that, and thank you, Chris, for writing that. Those are penetrating words and very beautiful to lead us into that. So I'm going to now move to John to share the readings that Dennis has chosen to highlight his perspectives, which he'll be giving after that.
Thank you, Scott. We have 3 readings this morning. The first reading is by Donald Robertson, and it's from an article in The Guardian last April. He wrote, "The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus was the last famous Stoic philosopher of antiquity. During the last 14 years of his life, he faced one of the worst plagues in European history. The Antonine plague, named after him, was probably caused by a strain of the smallpox virus. It's estimated to have killed up to 5 million people, possibly including Marcus himself. From 166 to around 180 AD, repeated outbreaks throughout the known world took place. Roman historians describe the legions being devastated and entire towns and villages being depopulated and going to ruin. Rome itself was particularly badly affected, carts leaving the city each day piled high with dead bodies. In the middle of this plague, Marcus wrote a book known as the Meditations, which records the moral and psychological advice he gave himself at that time. He frequently applies Stoic philosophy to the challenges of coping with pain, illness, anxiety, and loss. It's no stretch of the imagination to view the Meditations as a manual for developing precisely the mental resilience skills required to cope with a pandemic. The second reading is by Marcus Aurelius, and it is from Meditations and Other Writings. And he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Do not act as if you are going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." And our third reading is by Stanislas Dehaene, from Consciousness and the Brain, Deciphering How the Brain Codes Our Thoughts. Introspection makes our conscious motives and strategies transparent to us, while we have no sure means of deciphering them in others. Yet we never genuinely know our true selves. We remain largely ignorant of the actual unconscious determinants of our behavior, and therefore we cannot accurately predict what our behavior will be in circumstances beyond the safety zone of our past experiences. The Greek motto, "Know thyself," when applied to the minute details of our behavior, remains an inaccessible ideal. Our self is just a database that gets filled in through our social experiences, in the same format with which we attempt to understand other minds. And therefore, it is just as likely to include glaring gaps, misunderstandings, and delusions. Dennis, thank you for bringing these to us this morning, offered as wisdom for the journey.
May we walk in its
May
light.
we walk in its light.
Thank you so much, John.
For one moment, sorry, Dennis, I was going to introduce you.
Please do.
I was going to say one thing. I was just reminded that one of the original ideas of the rack behind me, John has reminded me, was for intentions, to intention about something. And so I would love thank you for the reminder to add that to the idea of even our silent time. So it's intentions of what to do with something. So thank you for that. And then I was going to say to Dennis, I was going to say what John said, but thank you for the people that bring the perspectives here and the wisdom they bring in the readings. To add that wisdom to our life is so appreciated, especially when it bugs me. When I'm hearing bugs me, it's like, oh, darn, yeah, that is true. And so I hope you get bugged by the reading as well. I hope you get disturbed and enlightened by. And so we've heard from Dennis before. Dennis is one of us and newer of us, but one of us in heart and mind. And so we've asked him to bring another perspective, and I celebrate that deeply. Dennis, thank you for putting the time into that for us. And so I invite you to share with us.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I hope that I will actually probably do a little bit of both, a little disturb and enlighten. I think that was, the way I grew up, that was kind of part of the prophetic mission, if you would, to both disturb and to encourage and empower. So I'm really so happy to be sharing with all of you at West Hill. I've come to love you so much over the time that I've been involved with the congregation. And I want to share really a little bit about myself and my journey in my life. And I think over my life, I've lived most of my life, as the slide, the title will say, from the outside, the e-blast that came out, from the outside in. And this latter half, well, not really half, the latter few years of my life, I've been trying to live a little bit differently, a little bit from the inside out. And I really want to share a bit of that journey with you. And I hope that you're going to get some value from that. So, as I mentioned, I really did start out living from the outside in. It's a little bit of how I was raised. And let me share with you a little bit of a story. I think I will give some context to really what that was about. I was in Dominica. I want to say it was around, Dominica is where I was born. It's in the West Indies. It's a little speck in the Caribbean Sea. I was visiting my mother. She runs a church down there. My mother is a minister. My sister is a minister. I was a minister of this bit of the family business. I went to visit my mom in Dominica some years back, and I was out of the ministry, and I really just wanted something to drink. And not surprisingly, there was nothing to be found in the fridge at the parsonage where my mother lived. So I put on my sandals and I ventured down into the heat of the Dominican sun and past the wrought iron gates of the churchyard and into the whitewashed stone brick, off the whitewashed stone brick where it clung. And I could see myself there at that wall, painting that thing 20 years ago with the Malaho Gospel Tabernacle sign. I painted that with my dad some time back. It was now all chipped and faded. And I walked down the street to a little store that was slapped onto a hut in the village. Through the entrance, and there I saw two middle-aged looking ladies. One of them looked up at me as I kind of took the one step through the doorway, and she says, you look like preacher's son, don't you? They used to call my dad preacher. He was a preacher of the gospel, right? He packed out my family and left the trappings of middle-class Canadian life to go and serve in Dominica so many years ago. I had not been in Dominica for quite a while, but they recognized me somehow as being his son. I just really was there. I wanted a beer. I wanted to grab a kubali. I wanted something to drink. They recognized me, and Maho, where we lived, is a tough little village. It's named after the Maho River, which you'll see there in that picture. It overflows every once in a while in the rainy season. Maho is a little bit of a slum. It's got very narrow streets, and if you happen to be walking by when a truck or more than one car rushes by, you're going to have to go up onto the sidewalk, just to make sure you don't get run over. Actually, it's not really much of a sidewalk. It's a little strip next to the gutter. That place it's a shanty town. Houses are hunched up against dangerously narrow streets. On that island, it's an island of less than 70,000 people, Dominica. But Maho is a village that just overflows with life. And there's dogs and saints and hoodlums and hustlers and drunkards and whores and children. And they're all just there on a few square miles of Caribbean Sea. It's a slum, but the people, they're proud, resourceful, gritty, happy people. My folks had spent a good amount of my teen years there while I was up in Dominica, in Canada rather. While I was up at the age of around 19, my father died, 1989. He was 49 years old. I went down for his funeral some years. I went down for his funeral all those years ago. And it's incredible. It was incredible to me because on such a small island, there were hundreds, I want to say, maybe 1,000 or more people at my dad's funeral. And they would tell me about how much he had touched their lives as a man. Not as a minister, but as somebody who visited them when they were in the hospital, somebody who visited them when they were in jail, somebody who came and took care of them, who employed them. And I really realized at that time when I saw that outpouring of love from my dad, that the ministry was the only thing I wanted to do. And that's why I went into the ministry all of those years ago. So, to those ladies in that store, when I went back down, they said, yes. I said, yes, I'm preacher's son. I'm preacher's son. I didn't know if I should remember them or not. Maybe they went to the MGT, the church where he planted some years back. I couldn't recognize them. Yeah, I'm Sam's son. Maybe they heard that I'd come through, the village, and through the grapevine, they heard that I kind of look like my dad, when I put on some weight and grow a beard. So perhaps that's how they recognized me. It used to bother me when people would compare me to my father when I was a teenager, how teenagers are. But later on in life, it kind of counted it a privilege when anybody would compare me to him in any way. So I counted it a compliment when they said, well, you remind me of your dad. But then they said something that I thought was one of the greatest compliments ever. He loved us so much. He loved us so much. And that was really, I got to say, why I had went into the ministry in the first place. That's what my mom's all about. This lovely lady over here is my mother. She's one of the kindest women and one of the kindest people on planet Earth. She's in love with poor people. She has spent the last, I want to say, about 30 years taking care of them in Maho at a program she calls Feed My Sheep, which is a feeding program for the elderly, the indigent, people with mental disabilities, and so forth. And she has what I call a little bit of the family illness, which is perhaps living a little bit too much from the outside in, caring just a little bit too much, and sometimes neglecting herself. Honestly, sometimes neglecting everything. Back when I was a younger man, my mother told me a story about how when I was born, she had a little bit of an accident and prayed really hard that God would save my life, and she promised, that if he did so, I would be dedicated to the ministry. Well, that's what I was raised thinking, that my whole life was about this life of service. It was all about being for other people. It was all about service for other people. And I really started to forget about myself. I call it the family illness. We don't normally tell Bible stories or stories from that book around here. But I'm going to just bring up one. You'll recognize this image. It's one of Abraham and Isaac. And the story goes that God demanded a sacrifice from Abraham of his son, his only son. I can't help but thinking back on my life right now, how many things my family had sacrificed for other people, how many things that I had sacrificed for other people. Now, it doesn't have to be religion that does that to you. It could be your job. In matter of fact, it could be your political ideology. And we have nationalism and all kinds of other ideologies that make people do things that otherwise, like Abraham and Isaac, that quite honestly are a little messed up. That's the kind of a danger of living from the outside in, because you start to twist things so that there's things that are more important than the things that are closest and dearest to you, like yourself and your family and those things that you really should prioritize. So that's the way I've been living for a good part of my life. I struggled a lot in my later years as a minister. I was trying to really hear from God. I'm Sam's son, and now I'm not going to as John has said, we're not going to judge how you want to deal with your own proverbial light bulbs, but this is my perspective, my experience, and I for many years had really struggled and prayed and tried to hear from somebody out there, try to find some kind of locus of center of my life that was external to myself. I just really was getting nowhere. Finally, I just really gave up. I left the ministry. I had lost my religion. I had lost my faith. This was about 20 years after I joined the ministry when I was 29 years old. It took a good 20 years perhaps for me to kind of transition out of it and into what I would now call more of a humanist spirituality. But for many, many years, I was just broken and anchorless in my life. So what do I do now? I didn't know. A few years after that, it seemed like a bit of a blessing to me. My sister, well, in a weird kind of way. And I've told you this story a little bit before, part of that. My sister, then 16 years old, got unexpectedly pregnant in Dominica. And, being the kind of person and the family who would live, just drop everything to save another, we picked up and invited her into my home and helped to raise these two lovely nieces, my nieces, Rachel and Sarah. That was wonderful. It filled a deep and urgent need in my life to do something for others. And it gave my life meaning again. Unfortunately for me, and you'll remember this as well, perhaps from the perspective I shared last year. Unfortunately for me in 2010, after the birth of the second child, Sophie rather. After the birth of Sophie, Sarah had a postpartum psychotic episode and killed both of the kids. It drained me. It destroyed me. It was something that, really, I felt like my life was in tatters. If I had to compare myself to another story, I'll pull up I felt at the time that I was experiencing like the trials of Job. My wife's, then my ex-wife's father had cancer and was dying. She became all stressed out. And while I was a support system for her back in the day, now I was to blame. At the lowest point of my life, my sisters had left the house. Sarah and the kids were no longer in my life. And I was alone, moving a 4-bedroom townhouse in North York, just trying to get that packed up so I could get on with my life and carry on. my life was rubble. And at that time, I was on antidepressants. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying by Mark Twain. He goes, of all the things I've ever lost, I miss my mind the most. Well, I that night moved packing up that townhouse by myself. I literally lost my mind. And it was just at the one point, the lowest experience of my life. And on the other, perhaps one of the best transformative experiences of my life. Because that point, I realized I had to do something to save myself. I had to do something to save myself. And it is, if you've ever been a lifeguard, that's the kind of the lifeguard's first job, is to make sure that they're okay. I think I'd forgotten that. I had to kind of stop and change how I was doing things, stop living my life from the outside in and just start with myself. I packed up that townhouse. I packed up that townhouse. I moved into an apartment in Yonge and Davisville area. I shut the door. I realized for the first time in my life that I was alone. There was no sisters. There was no voice inside my head. No one was reading my thoughts. I was by myself, and I had to save myself, and I had to start all over again. At that time, I was really fortunate to have been matched up with a really great therapist. A therapist who introduced me to cognitive behavioral therapy, to the thinking of folks like Marcus Aurelius, who John read earlier. And I started to realize that I could regain a level of control and reduce my own suffering by learning to have some control over how I interpreted my circumstances. So it really opened my eyes into the power of my own mind to help change my life. Now, I know that some of you are going through difficult times, and we all do. And sometimes there's clinical reasons and other reasons, circumstances that will prevent you from making those sorts of changes. But for me, that therapist really helped me get over that, like writings of Aurelius and the attitude that I needed to kind of just reshape and focus on my own mental space. My wife, Galia, of course, was a great help to me at that time, helped me to snap out of it and say, just focus on the here and now. So I started to rebuild my mental life all over again. I started to live, if you would, from the inside out. Now, suppose that you were dropped somehow in the universe, fully formed and aware, in the middle of nowhere. You have some pressing questions to answer. Maybe questions like, where am I? What is going on? Who am I? And then what do I do? It's a good reason. It's a good thing that babies aren't born with all of their faculties intact, because it would be a pretty traumatic experience, I'm sure, to have to answer all of these questions. But let's have a look at those questions. If you're going to start all over again and to rebuild your life, as I was doing at that time, you have to start to address these questions. My life, my worldview had changed. My worldview was rubble, as I mentioned. So I had to start to address questions like, where am I? Well, thanks to countless philosophers, countless generations of physicists, I know, and map makers and so forth, I know that I'm here in Adelaide and John, in Toronto, Canada, on the Earth, in the solar system, in the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy, in the local cluster of the Virgo supercluster, the local group of the Virgo supercluster in the observable universe. This is where I am. We have really good answers to the question, where are we? Where am I? That's a question that we can answer with some confidence today. What's going on? Again, that's a question that, thanks to people like Isaac Newton, scientists, historians, people who do the news, we have some fairly satisfying answers to those questions as well. But when it comes to the question of who am I, it kind of gets a little bit more complicated. Now, that's a question of self. The self is an individual who is the object of their own reflective consciousness. The self then is a somewhat outward observation that's getting reflected back in. It's a complicated proposition to kind of understand then who you are. And there's so many answers to it. I'm a man, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a partner, I'm a Canadian, I'm Dominican, I'm a Westerner, an entrepreneur, I'm a basketball enthusiast, a thinker, dancer, singer, pedestrian. Sometimes I'm a motorist, sometimes I'm a cyclist. I'm middle-aged. I'm a mammal, a primate, a vertebrate. I'm so many things. But with all of those words, it's still hard for me to kind of really get a sense for who I am. I suppose at 52 years old now, although I feel like I know myself better than I've ever known myself, the more that I know about myself, the less I feel like I know. And it's a strange paradox. There's an ancient Greek aphorism, know thyself. Know thyself, he says. And Plato, thought that was so important that he would put everything else on pause, because he said, why should I bother thinking about the rest of the world when I have not yet really learned about myself? And I think it's really important for us to kind of just stop and take a really good look at who are we. For me, after I had ditched the trappings of my old worldview, my old dogmatically informed worldview, the question of who I am became something really interesting to me. I learned that I am a physical being. I'm a physical being who's made up of some 32 trillion cells, each of them a living organism unto themselves. And it doesn't include the trillions of bacteria and microbes that exist within me. In one sense, the I that's talking to you right now is also something that's an emergent phenomenon from my brain and the 86 billion neurons that are here. Some would argue that the mind is something different than the brain. We don't really have a good basis to say things like that. So when I talk about it from here on out, I'm going to talk about it interchangeably, because everything we know about the brain and the mind says that they are intimately connected. So who am I? I'm a brain talking to you. And I have a job to do as a brain. Brains evolved to do what? Brains evolved to take care of us as organisms. So I realized that really one of my primary jobs is to take care of myself. Who am I? There's a parable, I'll call it. It's called the Ship of Theseus. Just one moment. In ancient Greeks, Theseus was a legendary king who supposedly had founded the city of Athens. And to honor him, the Athenians decided to keep his ship. And they kept it for a good long time. And over time, stuff started to rot and the planks got old, and they replaced a plank of the ship, and then another plank, and another plank, and another plank. And the story goes, or the thought experiment so goes, well, is it still the same ship? Is it still the same ship? If you replace all of the planks over time, is it still the same ship? You might have heard that the human body replaces itself every 7 years. I've understood actually that's probably not exactly true. It's about a few things replace themselves every few days. A few types of cells replace themselves every few days. A few cells, like our fat cells, every 8 years. Our skeletons about 10% a year. So I guess genes just about fully replace your skeleton by now, which is great. Brand new for you. Congratulations. But our brain cells, for example, are with us for life if we're lucky. Now, they don't regenerate. I think that's a little bit telling, actually, about something about how we should treat and prioritize our minds and our brains. So I talk about them interchangeably, as I said, how we should prioritize that, because you're stuck with your brain. You got to take care of it. Who are you? It's largely somebody who's resident in here. Now, think about that ship Theseus. This is me. Me as a young boy. Who am I? I was born a babe. I don't know where this child has gone. At some point, I became a man. I don't know when that was. At some point, I will be an old man. I am not exactly sure when that will be. Certainly, looking back through time, I'll be able to look at a date and another date and say I was young and I was old. But we transition so seamlessly throughout our lives that who we are is a really hard thing to nail down. It's something that is ever evolving, and is something that changes in so many different contexts. I mentioned things like a son, a father, a partner. All of that is just so fluid. Much like Theseus's ship, I can't really say when one thing changes into another. John read for us something by Stanislav Dehaene. I want to pull out just this line. He said that our selves is just a database that gets filled through our social experiences. That's interesting to me as well. Because just like, there's complexities in understanding who I am because of how I evolve through time, there's also some complexities involved in who I am because of what Stanislav said, because of the social aspects of that. In some sense, who I am is something that I can only really appreciate fully by understanding the social experiences that I'm interacting with you, how I'm interacting with you, how I'm interacting with my family, with communities and society. So again, living from the inside out, I start first of all to understand what I am as a physical creature, to start to take care of myself, to start to take care of and to appreciate my wife and partners and so forth. But I cannot fully appreciate who I am as a human being until I appreciate the social influences on my life as well. Lastly, that last big question. So there was questions, where am I? Where am I? Who am I? What should I do? Is that last question. It's a great question as well. And I want to submit to you to, just like the previous question that Stanislav kind of let us know was something that we could only ascertain socially. I think this is also a question that we can only ascertain socially as well. What should we do? It is something that really, if you understand relativity, we also know that through the theory of relativity, it tells us that every viewpoint is unique unto itself, but also not special. Everything is actually, all of our viewpoints, all of our perspectives are relative to other perspectives. I would say as well that our morality, our ethics, our identity, who we are, then is something that we must view as relative to other people and to other viewpoints. So what should we do about it? What should we do about who we are? I think that's something that we need to figure out together. It's one of the reasons why I'm just so pleased to be here and part of West Hill. Because, as I've come through my journey with you, I've started to get a little bit of a better sense of who I am. Started to get a little bit of a better sense of where I fit into the world. Starting to learn then a little bit better what I should do about it. And I just want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for that gift. And I hope that what I've shared here with you today was just going to help you to stop and reflect a little bit about what you are, who you're becoming, to understand that that's a process of evolution. That's a process of evolving, a process of becoming, but it is something that we need to do together. And with that, I think that I'm going to close out, and I'm going to return back to Scott. We have coming up in a few minutes a congregational meeting. We're going to talk about a few very important things, some things about our future and how we're going to go forward together and what we should do in this world. So look forward to seeing you then. And Mr. Kearns, I will turn back over to you. Thank you.
With the question still on the board there, what we should do is thank Dennis very much for the richness of his what he engaged in to prepare this, which I know, as we know him, would have been a very personal and inside thing, and to bring it out and to make it happen for us. And any of those questions you've raised and the thought that you've raised, we listen to it now, but we let it percolate through the week. And if there's any questions, I know that you could challenge Dennis on anything at all, and he would enjoy the conversation. But if there's more you want to talk about, or bring it up on Tuesday, bring it up on Thursday, that's welcome too. And because of his stress on doing it together, we're going to close. And I chose this particularly for what we're heading into, because in every conversation I've been part of, at least that has been on the Zoom about what we're discussing at the congregational meeting, I've been very aware of the bond of love that we share, and that to hold to that, if we can be a family that disagrees even vehemently, if we can be a family that misunderstands each other and then hangs in long enough to maybe see it slightly differently, and maybe we're half as convinced as we were before, but underneath it all, we're cherishing the other human being with respect and with compassion, then that's a really good family. And so I want to celebrate that and move towards our congregational meeting, taking what Dennis just said about the social aspect of all those questions. We can't do it on our own, we're together. So even given that was a message about the inside out, it was all in the context of this outness that we are together. So Babette has recorded this for us, and the words will be on the screen, the bond of love. And you're welcome to sing along mutedly.
We are joined together in a bond of love, with cords of freedom and of duty. Connected in the spirit, our spirits are strong, in a bond of wonder and of beauty. Made by all of us, for all of us, fashioned by everybody's hands. All our differences, all we share, woven into many colored strands. And this bond will
Thank you, Babette, for recording that. And for those of you that know that song, it's been West Hill for a long time, and it has been a bond that has held us through a lot and will continue to do so. So thank you, Dennis, again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for everyone that was present here. You're all part of it. And we're very quickly moving right into our congregational meeting. So I pass the baton to